Okay, so before I get into some other stuff related to your next paper, I would like to take a few minutes to talk about the thesis. It's one of the most important things you should learn in writing. It's one of those words that you pretty much only use in an English class, or it only seems like you use it in an English class. It actually means something that you are somewhat familiar with. You ought to be familiar with. When you write in the real world, your boss probably won't ask you about a thesis statement. You probably have covered it in another class to some degree. But it is an important element, particularly of academic writing. But once you kind of understand the concept, you don't necessarily need to know the word. You just need to understand the concept in order to make it work for the writing that you have to do in everyday professional life. Okay? Thesis statement is going to be driven by the three words that we talked about before. The three, I call them the most important words in writing: purpose, audience, and context. What your thesis should be should have to do with why you are writing. Why are you doing it? Who are you writing for? What's your writing situation? Okay? Those things are very, very important to how you determine what your thesis is going to be. So let's figure out what it actually is. Your thesis is not really your subject. It's the point you are making about your subject. Big, big difference. I oftentimes ask students to explain to me what their thesis statement is, and they tell me baseball or a book. No, that's what you're writing about. Tell me the point you wish to make about your subject. Baseball's fun. Okay, well, that's getting somewhere, but that's not probably a good thesis, but it is a point. It's defined by someone else as a sentence in an essay, report, research paper, or speech that identifies the main idea and the central purpose of the text. It serves as the organizing principle of the text, usually appears in the introductory paragraph, often at the end. Usually in academic writing, that's where your professors are going to want that. There are other reasons why a thesis can come somewhere else in your paper or in your writing, but that's where it usually shows up in college papers. So it's always one sentence. It's a statement. It's not a question. It identifies the subject, but it also takes a stand about the subject. It doesn't announce the subject. Thesis is not the subject of your essay. It's not a statement of fact. Think of it as something you got to prove. You don't have to prove a fact. It's not an announcement. Today I'm going to talk about such and such. That's not a thesis statement. It's not a question. It's not the introduction. Sometimes I have students work on formulating a thesis statement, and they think that it has to be the whole introduction. If you remember yesterday, I talked about introductions and conclusions. And it says an introduction serves two purposes: to get your reader interested, tell your reader where you're going. Well, the thesis serves that second purpose, but it's not the whole purpose of your introduction. It should eventually, notice that I use the word eventually in brackets. Let me explain that in a moment. Be a statement that can be argued, developed, or explained. It has to be a statement. Has to be something you can develop or explain or argue. It must make an assertion, a point. It has to address the focus and the question of the assignment. If your thesis is just on the general topic, don't expect a very good grade, because everything you write after that is just stuff. Focused, specific, clear. Any questions about that so far? I know some of you probably have had some training or education where they tried to get you to write very generalized thesis statements, because that seems like you can write a lot about it, But the truth is, you can't. You can write maybe a short 5-paragraph essay, but since we've already figured out that in the real world we don't write 5-paragraph essays, we need something more specific, more focused. When you write a thesis, you want to avoid things like general statements, vague statements. I liked that movie. How about, I liked that movie because it was exciting? Or, I liked that movie because it made me think about this topic. And then all your points point to that topic, right? History is important. That's a very general statement. It's also something that you would need more than an essay to prove, right? If you really wanted to make that argument solid, you probably need some more. Avoid preaching, moralizing, or grand statements of the universe. Don't take life for granted. Gee whiz. That's special. It's also a Hallmark card. Don't announce your intentions. That drives me bananas. I know some of you have been told to do that. But in most real writing, we don't go, in this essay, I will discuss the 5 reasons why you should vote for this candidate. You will just say, vote for this candidate because. Try to avoid anything that sounds like a formula. When I see a sentence in the first paragraph that sounds like a 5-paragraph essay is coming, like there are 3 reasons to go to class. No, it is boring. It's very boring. And guess what? It's wrong. There are hundreds of reasons to go to class. Or there's one good reason. You might write a better essay by just saying, there's lots of good reasons to go to class, but here's one of the best reasons. That's a much more interesting paper to me. Avoid straying from your assignment. Very important question here. Do I have to write my thesis statement before I write the rest of my paper? It's a good question. Because I know most of you have been trained or you've been educated to do, for example, barrier exams. We call them barrier exams in my business, but you might have called them standardized tests. You know, where you get a prompt, you're told to take a test, and you don't have a lot of time. You just have to come up with this thing right away. And so generally you're coming up with a thesis, a point, and then how you're proving that point afterwards. Well, if you can think of every single thing you're going to say in your paper, everything, and you know exactly what you want to say and how you want to say it and how you want to develop it, and let's say you can do that within 10 minutes, then yes, write your thesis statement first. But chances are real good you can't. If you're willing to make a statement that helps you draft, but we're willing to revise, that's another problem with writing. We talked about revision yesterday. If you're not willing to make changes to that statement, then you maybe shouldn't write your thesis statement first. Oftentimes, a general thesis statement or a thesis statement you're willing to change is helpful to get you started, as long as you're willing to say, as I've written and discovered more about my topic or thought about my topic, I need to change that. And think about that in very practical terms. Let's say you have a point, and then as you write, you realize your whole essay or the bulk of your essay is really about a different point. Which one is easier to change? The one sentence or the whole paper to fit the one sentence you first wrote? Probably easier to change the one sentence. If writing this discovery is necessary before you can nail down your main points, then no. And oftentimes this is the way we write. We don't always write with a nice, neat outline in our heads. It would be great. If you can do that, fantastic. If you can't, it's okay. We can revise. I'm a big proponent of revision. I think my wife is a very good writer. She's one of those who has to have all her ducks in a row, as they say. She writes a very detailed outline, and she goes over it and over it and over it before she commits herself to writing. And it works for her. It really does. I can't write that way. I have to write 4 or 5 things I know I want to cover, and then I just write anything that comes into my head, knowing that I'm going to have to cut a bunch of crap out and figure out what my point is. And that's okay. Any questions? Concerns? Objections?